Warning.
That in the 96 law, the Safe Drinking Water Act, the rewrite of the Water Act, what Congress wanted to happen was for the EPA to begin to move on these emerging contaminants, and they expected that EPA would move on these emerging contaminants. They didn't expect that not one emerging contaminant would be regulated from 96 to as we sit here. Not one thing has happened. Nothing.
New Jersey grappled with this issue of chromium moving through the environment, and it is very soluble, and it is not surprising that we're beginning to find it as we look. Perhaps most relevant today is that I led the state's efforts to investigate the chromium slag and also to look at drinking water, and conducted some of the first tests of toxics in drinking water. To the issue of can we do it, is it feasible, we have made great progress in reducing toxic chemicals in the water. Now, the current EPA standard for chromium in drinking water is outdated. It does not reflect current science, because our understanding has evolved, as you've heard today. And there's little argument today that chromium-6 is a carcinogen, and it's a carcinogen by the route of oral exposure, drinking water. All right? Also, combined with the exploratory studies of the Environmental Working Group, this is not a surprise to scientists in the field. We've assumed that chromium-6, the water-soluble part of chromium, would be present in the nation's drinking water, and indeed we're beginning to understand that evidence. This is a wake-up call. But we have broader issues. The challenges of chemical pollutants in drinking water go far beyond that very narrow risk that EPA now regulates. We've learned that virtually anything we flush down our drains shows up in low levels in our tap water. From personal care products to fuel additives, pharmaceuticals to persistent toxics, we know that water contains a complicated mixture of chemicals. And it's time for us to rethink how we address these. If you look at the way EPA does its work, one substance at a time, one environmental medium at a time, it takes an awful long time. And in fact, if we're going to continue this one-at-a-time process, our National Academy panel that looked at this said this system is bogged down. Sometimes it takes 10 to 20 years for a risk assessment to be completed. There are inherent uncertainties in the science, and they've made risk assessments a convenient target for those who seek to avoid regulation or the cost of remediation. And we've witnessed these battles over MTBE, perchlorate, arsenic, and now chromium-6. Unfortunately, raising doubt about public health impacts has become a successful strategy for delaying action. As a former state regulator, I'm a realist. I understand the concerns about cost. There are no quick solutions to removing toxic substances from our drinking water. Our tap water reflects our way of life. But if we're going to be responsible and preserve our drinking water resources, we have to move forward. So I'd like to conclude with a brief list of recommendations for the committee to consider. First, this one-at-a-time, 20-year process is bogged down. We have to be more efficient. We need to shift from reaction to chemicals in the water to prevention of contamination. We have to improve the protection of our surface and groundwater resources. And we have to expand state and regional water monitoring efforts. The Environmental Working Group did a great service, I think, by conducting this evaluation, but it's unfortunate that our states and our EPA regions don't have the capacity to conduct this kind of monitoring. We have to recognize the potential cumulative impact of this mixture of multiple contaminants, that many of which have common health endpoints, effects on development and neurological development. And most importantly, perhaps, we have to advance our drinking water treatment technologies to better remove contaminants and their precursors. Controlling pathogens has been a cornerstone of public health to prevent infectious disease. Now we must also recognize that monitoring and reducing chemical contamination in our drinking water is an essential component of our public health efforts to prevent chronic disease. Thank you for this opportunity to speak with you today, and I'm anxious to answer questions.
Thank you very much. I would like to address
key issues before the committee are hexavalent chromium perchlorate and proposals to mandate regulation within a year.
We believe it's in the public interest to address these concerns with these contaminants within the regulatory framework that is already in place. As you know, the Safe Drinking Water Act mandates a rigorous process for evaluating risks to public health and determining what risk management actions are appropriate. The Act requires that the regulatory process use the best available peer-reviewed science, a principle that this administration strongly endorses. These principles are critical to ensure that actual risks are addressed and that limited resources are directed based on complete information. Should funds be misdirected on risks that have not been fully or appropriately vetted, a community's resources cannot be recovered to address the genuine risks and other important community needs. As I stated earlier, we support drinking water regulations that are developed through a transparent process based on the best science and provide meaningful health protection in an affordable manner. This foundation of sound science must not be compromised. The Safe Drinking Water Act affords the Environmental Protection Agency a robust, transparent methodology upon which it can evaluate, propose, and promulgate regulations. Unfortunately, the proposed legislation before the Senate on chromium and perchlorate seem to discount the principles of the Safe Drinking Water Act, the same principles to which the administration is committed. Same can be said for EPA's recent actions. The tone, delivery, and content of EPA's response to EWG's report regarding hexavalent chromium imply that regulatory change is an urgent and foregone conclusion. EPA has gone outside the structure set forth in the Safe Drinking Water Act, which places drinking water utilities in an untenable position. These actions cause me great concern. EPA has urged drinking water utilities to collect samples throughout the treatment process to better understand the occurrence and concentration of hexavalent chromium. However, the agency has not afforded itself the benefit of the data yielded in this sample collection because there's no national repository for the data. Had the processes established under the Safe Drinking Water Act been followed, the monitoring would have been conducted under the unregulated contaminant monitoring rule and would resolve any issues relating to analytical methodology and data collection. As it stands, the community now must decide, absent critical information, such as a clear understanding of the actual risks associated with the presence of very low levels of hexavalent chromium, if it should expend the resources to conduct this monitoring. And should a drinking water utility conduct this monitoring, how will it convey the results and their meaning to its customers? At Fairfax Water, we made the decision to monitor. This decision was based on the level of concern expressed by our customers. We have monitored and found that one of our water sources has no detectable level of hexavalent chromium. In the other source, the level was found at the reporting limit of the method, so extremely low levels. But the real question that I'm constantly asked to answer is the water safe? Is the level of hexavalent chromium, the level of perchlorate, or the level of the next new contaminant of interest in the water going to harm me and my family? These are valid questions, ones that must be answered by a consistent, robust, transparent framework. So you may ask, how do we, Fairfax Water, answer these questions? We posted our results to our website and explained that there's a process in place at EPA to evaluate the risks and make decisions about the appropriate level of regulation to address public health concerns. We explained that EPA is currently reviewing the risks and will finalize its risk assessment for hexavalent chromium later this year. At that time, EPA can make a determination if further regulatory action is warranted. We acknowledge that the processes for determining the actual risk for human health from different substances or compounds can seem frustratingly slow. Science can be complicated. However, it's only by applying methodical, peer-reviewed studies that we can know where actual risk lies. We encourage the Congress to allow the unregulated contaminant monitoring rule, the contaminant candidate list, and the 6-year review processes created in the 1996 amendments to the Safe Drinking Water Act be allowed to work. EPA and AWWA and its members are committed to supporting the Act and these tools that help make sound regulatory decisions. Further, we pledge to continue to provide field data, participate in studies related to these processes, and make our methodologies transparent. We realize these are tough times for the federal budget.
I'm sorry, sir. Could you just finish that thought?
Bottom line is that Congress does not need to legislate individual drinking water standards. The Safe Drinking Water Act was amended in '96 to provide a scientifically sound and transparent method for selecting substances for regulation.
Okay.
Address some of the issues that have come up in the discussion about our study because they're very important ones. Let me start off by saying we have been working on drinking water issues at the Environmental Working Group for a long time. The reason we looked into hexavalent chromium, the reason we formed the hypothesis, was because we prepared, since 2005, the only source that you can go to look across the country, a very large database of as many of the drinking water contamination reports that have been filed by utilities with state agencies as we could assemble. When we looked at this set of data, we were able to determine that there were a number of cities that had detected and reported, as EPA required, total chromium levels. And our hypothesis was that if there were a number of cities that had total chromium, it was very likely that if anyone bothered to look, we would find hexavalent chromium. California is the only state that tests for hexavalent chromium, and where they have tested for it, they have fairly routinely found it. And it's not an accident that California, from a scientific standpoint, is driving the nation in terms of trying to understand the implications of very low levels of ingestion of hexavalent chromium as a carcinogen. We recognized and have stated in the study throughout its coverage that this puts water utilities in a bind. This is not a contaminant that they have put into the water. When we briefed the trade associations and called in advance to a number of the utilities, we made that very clear that we recognized this was not their problem. Of the utilities we contacted before releasing the study, Norman, Oklahoma, was the only one that really understood that this came from geological sources. But when we went ahead and submitted the test, the samples, we followed a protocol that was published the day we published the report. It's in great detail. We've made it available to everyone. We use the methodology that EPA is now recommending for water utilities who wish to follow it because it was approved by the Environmental Protection Agency for hexavalent chromium at those low levels. The detection limit is 0.02 parts per billion, which is the health guidance that's been recommended most recently for California. We were only able to conduct one sample per city in the time and with the funds we had available, but there has been new testing that has been conducted by a number of the cities and has been made public. And here's what they found. In Honolulu, they have reported 11 samples. We don't know the methodology, at least from what's before me, for certain. We don't know the exact location of where the samples were taken, but they found between 0.32 and 4.0 parts per billion. We found 2 parts per billion. So some of their samples were higher, some were lower. In the case of Madison, Wisconsin, they found in 4 wells that they tested 0.4 to 1.79 parts per billion. We found in our study 1.58, again within the range. Milwaukee tested and found 0.19 part per billion to 0.22 part per billion. We found 0.18, again right in the middle. And in the case of Norman, we have not seen the results yet. We look forward to that. In the case of Bend, Oregon, they have also reported results after our study. They tested 4 samples of source water from the Avion facility, 0.25 to 0.65. We found 0.78. That's the only city that's found slightly lower levels than the levels we found. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. That's
Break the logjam. You're absolutely right about no movement forward since the mid-90s. And even that movement has been quite little. We're actually stuck back in the late 70s, I think, in safe drinking water.
You know what, you know when